You see a succulent and you probably think, yeah, a tough little plant that stores water. And you're not wrong. But what you probably don't know is that underneath that simple idea, there's this hidden world of high-stakes strategy, surprising trade-offs, and just brilliant engineering that has evolved over and over again. So let's get into it, because the story of how a plant actually becomes a succulent is just fascinating. To really unlock this whole story, we only need two powerful questions. And honestly, you can use these to understand pretty much any biological system out there. The first one is super simple. What are the alternatives? For any feature you see in nature, what other options could have existed instead? And right behind that comes the second question. What are the consequences of each of those alternatives? Now, this isn't just a simple pros and cons list. We're talking about the ripple effects, the trade-offs that just cascade through the entire life of an organism. This simple little framework of alternatives and consequences, that's going to be our guide for this whole explainer. Okay, so let's put our framework to the test with the most fundamental choice a plant has to make in a dry environment. Should it evolve to store a ton of water or not? Just take a look at these two. On the left, you've got the classic succulent saguaro cactus, and on the right, the non-succulent palo verde tree. Now, these guys live side by side in the Arizona desert. They face the exact same challenges, day in and day out, but they have committed to completely different survival strategies. These are our two big alternatives right there in the wild. So what are the consequences of that big choice? Well, if you're a succulent, you store more water. Duh. But it also means your whole body acts like a giant thermal buffer. You heat up and cool down way more slowly. And get this, that super high water content can actually make you resistant to grass fires. But here's the trade-off. All that water is heavy, and that weight seriously limits your ability to grow lots of branches and new growth points, unlike your lightweight, twiggy neighbors. Okay, so a plant has gone down the succulent path, but we can just ask our question all over again. Are there different alternatives for how to be a succulent? And the answer is a resounding yes. Evolution has come up with a ton of different ways to solve this problem. For starters, you've got your leaf succulents, like this Nolina here. They concentrate all their water storage right in their leaves. Think of an agave or an aloe plant. Then there are the stem succulents, like cacti and this euphorbia. These guys basically turn their entire body into one giant living water tank. And this one might surprise you. There are even woody succulents, like this brachychaeton, or think of a baobab tree. They somehow manage to store incredible amounts of water inside what looks for all the world like a solid, hard tree trunk. And of course, some plants play it smart and safe. They become root succulents. They hide all their precious water reserves in this swollen base called a caudex, buried safely underground, away from thirsty animals and the scorching sun. So, we've looked at the alternatives on the whole plant level. Now let's zoom in, like way, way in, to the microscopic level. What are the alternatives for the building blocks themselves? How do you actually design a single cell to hold water? Well, it turns out there are pretty much two main options. On the left, you have living parenchyma cells. They've got thin, soft walls, and they're metabolically cheap for the plant to create. On the right, you have sclerenchyma, or fiber cells. These are actually dead when they're mature. They have thick, rigid walls, and they are way more expensive for the plant to produce. Let's start with the cheap option. These parenchyma cells, they're basically microscopic water balloons. Almost their entire volume is just a water-filled sac called a vacuole. And because they're mostly just water, the plant can build out this storage tissue with very little energy. It's a bargain. But, and this is a big but, there's a huge problem, a major consequence of this design. For a living cell to actually give up its water, its wall has to shrink and fold in on itself. And most cell walls just aren't built for that. So weirdly enough, a cell that's fantastic at storing water isn't necessarily any good at releasing it to the rest of the plant when things get dry. So, what does evolution do? It finds an alternative, of course. Some succulents have developed these incredible collapsing cells. Their walls are specifically designed to be flexible and wrinkly, almost like an accordion. This means they can shrink down dramatically, squeezing out a much, much higher percentage of their stored water to keep the rest of the plant alive when it really counts. All right, so let's jump over to that other cellular choice. What happens when a plant uses those expensive, dead fiber cells? What are the consequences of that design?
Well, think about it like this. Imagine you're going on a really long hike. A normal water bottle lets you drink the very last drop just as easily as you drank the first. But what if you had a smart bottle, one that sort of rationed the water for you? This quote from the source material just perfectly sums up how these fiber cells work.
The key to the whole thing is their shape. You see how they're long and tapered? These fiber cells act like a sponge that has different sized pores. The water that's in the wide middle part is easy for the plant to access, but the water in those narrow pointy tips, it's held onto much more tightly. The plant has to be in an extreme drought before it can pull that last life-saving bit of water out. It's a completely passive, built-in rationing system. So cool.
Okay, this is where it all comes together in a way you would never expect. That simple choice of using those cheap, living parenchyma cells to store water, it has a massive knock-on effect on literally the most important chemical reaction on the planet, photosynthesis.
See, a lot of succulents use a special kind of photosynthesis called CAM. And to make a long story short, it means they have to open their pores at night to take in carbon dioxide, and they store it as acid, which they then use for fuel during the day. But storing a whole bunch of acid inside your cells, well, that's a dangerous business.
Now look at this. The most important thing here is that both of these images are at the exact same magnification. On the right, you have non-succulent cells, and they are small and just jam-packed with those little green chloroplasts. But on the left, wow, the succulent cells are enormous. They have to be that big to safely dilute all that dangerous acid they're storing overnight. But look at the consequence. The chloroplasts are spread incredibly far apart.
And this leads to the final, incredible ripple effect. Because the chloroplasts are so spread out, a particle of sunlight can just zip right through a single cell without ever getting captured. So what's the plant's solution? It has to evolve much, much thicker layers of green photosynthetic tissue. We're talking sometimes 10 layers deep, just to make sure it can catch all the sunlight that a normal plant catches in just 1 or 2 layers. The simple need for water storage literally reshaped its entire anatomy for capturing energy.
It's amazing, right? From the overall shape of a cactus all the way down to the microscopic structure of its cells, everything is just a cascade of these trade-offs. That one simple choice to store water leads to dozens of other consequences, which just makes you wonder, what other incredible stories of alternatives and consequences are hiding all around us, just waiting in plain sight?